lovelies, and welcome back to this slightly belated installment in the Dark Tower Retrospectives. I must apologise, it's been a phenomenally busy few weeks, what with one thing or another. I'm actually working as well as work itself, which has been very, very busy recently for reasons which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. I'm also working on lots and lots of personal projects, including the scripts for a project that is sort of ongoing. Could be very, very interesting if we can get it produced, if we can get it out there. But that has been consuming all of my time, so I apologize for that. This is book 3 in the Dark Tower series, The Wastelands. Now, this one's a very, very interesting one for me personally. I don't know why. I have no idea why, but I did not read this book in order. I think I read The Drawing of Three first, which actually works. You can do that. It does work. You can actually start with The Drawing of Three and then go back to read The Gunslinger, and that actually works fine. And then I read The Wolves of the Calla, which is the no. Let me get this right. I actually read Wizard and Glass next, which is book 4. Then I went back and read The Gunslinger, and The Wasteland. I don't think I read The Wasteland until after I'd read The Wolves of the Calla, which is book 5. So this one, I don't know why. I don't know why it happened like that. It just did. So I actually came to The Wastelands quite late, and that is a real, real crying shame. Because this is a lot of people's favourite in the series, and it's not difficult to see why. The Gunslinger and The Drawing of Three are very much establishing books. They are very much sort of background books. What they're doing is setting up this wider story. And when I say wider story, I mean like 7 books, most of which are like 500 pages plus. This mythology is huge. It is enormous and resonant and has so much going on. The Wastelands is about the same size as The Drawing of Three and is as packed as it's actually way more so. I would say it's a book of 2 halves. So in the first half of the story, what I really love about it is that things have moved on. So it's about 5 weeks after the end of The Drawing of Three. So Roland and Eddie and Susanna are well on their way now. They're actually following the path of the beam. They're on their way to the Dark Tower, and you're getting details on how they work together, on how their relationships are developing. So Eddie and Susanna are now in a relationship. They're basically married at this point, which is really cool. And there's so much about what you get in the early stages of this book is so much about the back mythology of what Roland is trying to do and why, and how these characters fit into it. I love that. But you also get, there's more about the mythology of the worlds that they're passing through as well. So you get a lot about Gilead, where Roland comes from, and of the worlds that he's seen. These worlds that he's passing through, they are very much the worlds of Stephen King's own imagination. The whole series acts as like this grand map of Stephen King's imagination, and not just the stuff that he creates, but the stuff that has fed and informed the state of his imagination. There are references to so much in this book. This is probably one of the most literary of the Dark Tower books, as you'd expect from the title. I mean, The Wastelands, what's that? Well, clearly that's from T.S. Eliot's epic poem of the same name, and that features massively. Not only are there extracts from the poem in the book, but the stanzas of the poem inform the narrative, and some of the characters and the way things work out. It's so strange. It's very much a book of 2 halves. So you've got the first half, which is that, and also something is going very wrong with Roland. There's a lot of, as well as the mythological and fantastical stuff, King is really enjoying playing with the psychology of these characters, and he interweaves that with the metaphysics. So you've had already the establishment that this is a reality in which worlds and dimensions and realities all intersect and conflict and can be passed through. Well, Roland is going slowly mad at the beginning of this book. He's having weird dreams. He's having like fevers and what I suppose would be considered schizophrenic episodes. if he were a real person, if he were assessed, they would be considered schizophrenic episodes, blackouts. He can't remember where he is or what he's doing. He's dreaming of Jake, the boy, Jake Chambers, the boy from the first book that he, spoilers by the way, I'm going to assume that you've read the book by this point, that he allowed to die in the first book. He allowed Jake to die so he could continue on with his quest. You know, he was that callous back then. But he is dreaming of Jake, and Jake is dreaming of him. The story flips around. At one point, you're in whatever world they're passing through, and then it flips to a very real world New York. I think Jake is from the 1980s, I believe. I believe he's from like the early 1980s or late 1970s. And Jake is also having issues. He's not very comfortable in his world. I really love Jake, by the way. Jake is a lot of people's favorite character, and he's probably my favorite character as well, because he is the kind of kid, he's the anchor point for the reader, basically. If any kid or young adult finds this series, Jake is probably going to be the one that they identify with the most, because he doesn't belong in the world that he's born to, doesn't get on with his family, he doesn't understand his family, he doesn't work very well with his family or with the world that he's part of. He's not at home at school or with other kids or anything like that. He is this strange, dreaming, sort of never-ending story kind of kid, you know, who is more at home in books and in imaginary worlds. He's King. He's Stephen King. He is Stephen King, and he is Stephen King's readers. He is the avatar for King and King's readers, basically. And Jake is also having problems because he is simultaneously dreaming of Roland, and there is this really profound connection between them. He's also dreaming of his dead self. There is this weird kind of split in Jake's head, where in one reality he was killed by the same guy who pushed Susanna, or rather Odetta, in front of the train in the Drawing of Three. So he is simultaneously dead and alive. He's like schismed right down the middle, and it's slowly driving him mad. And part of the early sections of this book are about how they resolve this situation, how they fashion a metaphysical means of drawing Jake into this world, into Roland's world, just as Eddie and Susanna were. But unlike Eddie and Susanna, they've got to manufacture it. There isn't just a door waiting for Jake. They've got to sort of manufacture the means. There's a hell of a lot going on in this book. You get to see how sort of the metaphysics works. You get to see how there's almost like a time traveling element to it, because in this universe all times exist simultaneously, and all permutations of all times exist simultaneously. Technically, reality is so flimsy in the Dark Tower that you can technically access any point in reality at any time, and that's something that the characters do willy-nilly all the time. And I love that. I love the lassitude of it. I love the fact that the characters can walk from one reality, one dimension, one space and time into another quite happily, and that's what they have been doing. That's what Roland's quest is like, basically. They can move, they can just walk. They don't need any like special vehicle, they don't need any special equipment. You can just walk from one place to another, from one state of being to another, as long as you're following the beam, which is the path to the tower. It's really cool. And the second half, after Jake is sort of drawn through, and after all of the psychological stuff is resolved, the second half is kind of like this post-apocalyptic dystopian horror action adventure, which involves a desolate, irradiated city and mutants and all sorts of things. It's actually really cool. It starts off being kind of slow and psychological and quite fun in that regard, kind of dense. And then it turns into this action story with very classic King horror elements, and it works very, very well. The scope of of King's vision, of his imagination in this book is wonderful. It really is. The city of Lud, which is this giant, irradiated, dystopian city, is wonderful. You really get a sense of how broken the worlds are. A lot of the worlds they pass through are desolate because, of course, the tower is failing. The core of all reality is about to fall down, and that's what you're seeing reflected in all of the worlds that they pass through, including our own. That's happening in our own as well. It's the notion of all things tending towards chaos. There's almost like a physical element to what's happening, a cosmically physical element. The notion that reality tends towards chaos is what the tower expresses. They don't know if they're going to be able to fix it at the end, but the worlds they pass through are all either dead or dying. Some apocalypse has happened or is happening. And the characters they encounter are all grotesque, mutated, irradiated, mad. There is like this tribe of mutants in the city of Lud who are all gross as you could possibly imagine. They are absolutely disgusting. And they end up kidnapping Jake, so there is this rip-roaring adventure thing. But there's also an echo. There's an echo of what Jake and Roland experienced in The Gunslinger, and Roland has to make the same choice again, but chooses the opposite choice. He chooses to save Jake rather than to leave him. And this one, more than any of the others, is very much a transitional book. I mean, at this point, King is very clear that this is his magnum opus. He's quite well established in his writing career at the point that this was published, so he knows this is going to be the big Uber mythology. Unlike when he published The Gunslinger, or even The Drawing of Three, technically. It doesn't end. Interestingly, for a book this large in which so much happens, it actually doesn't end. You don't get an ending for this book. What you get is a cliffhanger, and a rather interesting one as well. They end up encountering this incredible train, which is part of the transit system for this world. It's called Blaine the Mono, and Blaine the Mono it's kind of like a monorail, but it's a monorail that passes between realities. It can actually traverse times, dimensions, and realities. And Blaine, it turns out, is sentient. He's like an AI. And again, one of those characters that everybody loves, because Blaine is a little mad. There's something not quite kosher about Blaine. He's a little crazy. But it ends where they board Blaine the Mono and they leave this world behind. They actually move on from this reality, from the city of Lud, and they are basically left suspended between realities on board this incredibly mad, ancient, AI-driven train. It's just so much. The book is florid with ideas. It's florid. There is a color coding thing. I don't know whether it was conscious on King's part, but there is kind of like this color coding that happens in these books. They're all different colors. The Gunslinger, when you read it, has this kind of orange, like desert quality to it. The Drawing of Three is oceanside and is blue for the most part. The Wastelands is green. It's irradiation. At the beginning, it's grass and it's vegetation. And then it becomes irradiation, disease, gangrene, sort of leprous sores and whatnot. It's fascinating that King weaves those elements into this series. It is, I mean, King said this himself, this is probably it for him. He probably won't write anything like the Dark Tower ever again, and nor would you ever need to. It is like Imagica is for Barker. It's the big thing that coheres everything else together. And it's so epic, I don't know why you'd want to undertake anything like it in another lifetime. It incorporates too much, quite frankly. It incorporates way too much. Now, the next one, I don't know what I'm going to do next time, because there was an addition to the Dark Tower series published a little after the primary series had finished. There was another book called The Wind Through the Keyhole, and I think I'm going to do that next, as opposed to moving on to Wizard and Glass, because Wizard and Glass is a really interesting one. It's very divisive, very contentious. It kind of divides the crowd, Wizard and Glass. I really like it myself. It's one of my favourites in the series. A lot of people don't. A lot of people don't like Wizard and Glass, and you'll see for why when we get to it. Until then, my dears, bye-bye!